And just in way of introduction, my name's Dan Byram, right? If you don't know me by my face. I'm going to go through a timeline of events that took place. I'm just going to start in January 2022 and go through to May 6th. And then I might talk about some other things, but that's the agenda, that's the catalog of distance I want to cover. I want to say this. I have talked to about this situation over many months. The Deacon Board, 7 men plus Dave Kennedy, that's 8. Dave Banfield, Casey DeLu, Bruce, Joel, Carl, Steve Dye, Jeannie Rathman, Danny Parmalee at Converge, Andrew Ford at Converge. I said I talked to all the deacons. This is not something that just kind of popped up in my crawl. You have to go back to May 6th and just say, to understand specifically, the Deacon Board invited me to their party. And so here I am going to help explain why that party took place and why we need to address the results of the party. So let me list the dates. January 26th, Josh Damsgaard was fired. That's the date we got the letter. He was fired. In that letter, it says that they were offering provision for Josh to help cover his benefits for some time. On February 9th, Mr. Little was confronted by a church member about his belief on homosexuality. February 22nd, the Deacon Board met with Marcus and the wives, whoever was there, and they discussed other things. If I understand correctly, at that meeting, he confessed he no longer believed that homosexuality was a sin. He was questioning the inerrancy of Scripture, and from a personal perspective, he was following a transgender ideology in his home. On February 22nd, in 1998, Bridget and I became members of Berean Baptist Church. So 24 years later, Marcus is confessing that he no longer follows Berean's constitution or doctrinal statements. On March 27th, he resigned publicly from the church. March 9th, he resigned to the Deacon Board in writing. March 27th, he resigned from the church publicly. He preached until Easter, April 17th. He's out the door. And we are now in a transition period. We have no pastor. On April 19th, that Tuesday, the Deacon Board wrote a letter. That letter contained basically 3 thought processes. The first was the church wasn't supportive of Mr. Little, and that's why he left the church. Had we been more supportive, he would have not thought himself not the man for the job. The second tier was that we as a church, people had been mean to him, had called him a heretic, and they said basically those who called him a heretic are more heretic than he is. I'm going to stop there for a second. The Deacon Board knows specifically I wrote them a letter, and I used very specific language, and that very specific language was he's a false teacher, and I illustrated that and I gave them examples. So that statement of him being a heretic or being called a heretic, I heard no one use the word heretic. That was the scolding letter. The third section of that letter was, there's a belief that you're not telling us the truth, that the Deacon Board isn't telling us the truth. And the Deacon Board's like, we want you to know that everything we said is true. Marcus and I would told the truth, and that it's prudent not to reveal everything. To tell more details could create needless injury. So the Deacon Board is here to guide the process and guide the church. And at the end of that letter, they say, but going forward, we're going to follow the church constitution. We're going to follow the leadership guidelines of the church. We're going to do that. The scolding letter didn't go over very well. I think the deacon got a lot of heat. I didn't say anything to him, but yeah, I read the letter. Then they wrote a second letter to the church on April 28th. That was a Thursday. And they wrote a letter to the church, kind of more of a process letter. Hey, we know there's stuff, right? We know there's some baggage. We know there's some red flags. Well, here's what we're doing step by step. Here's the things that are taking place to continue to guide the church. A well-written letter, nothing wrong with it. It mentions the steps. The letter was written on April 28th. On May 1st, the new era begins. And then on May 6th, our church discipline begins. So I want to go back to the conversations that I had with other people before I contacted the deacon board. I saw the video on May 20, 2021. That video has a premise, and that video is undercover. It is titled Isaiah on Justice. But the premise of the story, the reason for the teaching, it's 1 hour long, is to bring into this idea that Genesis 18 and 19, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, is not what we think it is. And the thesis statement of the teaching is Sodom's sin and Sodom's fate has little, if not nothing, to do with sexual deviancy. On that teaching, it was a video, was Mark and Ann Pfeiffer and Dave and Kawila Kennedy and some other people. They paid attention to this teaching. This was in May of 21. I watched it in February 22. I didn't know it existed. In December of 2021, Mrs. Little declared that she was the parent of a transgender child. That was on Twitter, okay? And so we had a lot of conversations. People were seeing what was going on. And, I'm going to say here, I believe it's very difficult for all of us to understand what's going on in any given family with their kids. And when you're talking about children, it's very difficult to know what to do. So if I understand it correctly, with the good news, is that a lot of people tried to reach out to them before any of this blew up to talk to them about what was going on. And I understand that people reach out to both parents, and both parents shut down people at different levels. They had no interest in any type of input into the scenario in which they found themselves, or they were guiding themselves, either one. I reached out to Gary Courtwright, who I've known for a very long time. We were friends in a small group, etc. And I reached out to him. It took us about a week to get together. And on March 17th, I had a conversation with Gary. Now let's review. Marcus resigned verbally to the deacon board on February 22nd. Marcus resigned in writing on March 9th. Okay? He was leaving the church. The deacon board didn't know how to announce it to the church. And what they were planning to do, if I understand it correctly, is they were planning to keep Marcus on at the church until such a time he could find himself other employment. He would be our pastor. We would proceed forward with him as our pastor. And hopefully by June or July, he would find gainful employment. He would resign from Berean, and we would all be sad or glad or whatever our emotions might be. He would move on about his day, and we would be without a pastor and go back into that process. A natural exodus where we would have no difficulties. The difficulty was that on March 18, one day after I talked with Gary Courtwright, Mrs. Little put on Facebook, "God is in her holy temple, let all the world be silent before her," capital H's. That is blasphemy of God as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to delve into the theology, but you can't have a female Jesus. And you can't have a female Jesus because Jesus is part of the Godhead. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. There is no replacement. That is the way it is. Jesus was always male, never female, could not be. And to call God a her is blasphemy of God. Now that was on the 18th. The deacon board heard about it on the 20th. This sped up the entire process. So plan A was to keep him until June or July. Plan B, he has to resign. Plan A and Plan B paid the same. He was either going to get paid as our pastor, or he was going to get paid as not our pastor. I am speculating, but I believe the deacon board struck a deal with Marcus so that he would resign on the 27th and they would take care of him, right? And that was the plan. The plan was to take care of Marcus. Our church constitution kind of fleshes out how we handle the money, right? We have a budget, we have deacons, we have a finance committee, and the way it works is we set up the budget. This is how we're going to spend the money every year, so we don't have to get approval every other minute. And then there's provisions in the budget to help us govern ourselves. And the purpose of the provision is to not tie us down to a previous decision. We can change our minds anytime we'd like, based on church approvals. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, when Marcus resigned, the question is, did he resign or was he fired? The church constitution specifically gives provision for firings. If he was fired by a vote of the church, he would be automatically paid on the Constitution 3-month severance. However, he resigned. He did not get fired. They specifically put that in writing in public. We must believe it to be true. He resigned verbally on February 22nd. He resigned in writing on March 9th. He resigned on the 27th. He left the church April 17th. He left on his own accord following giving us more than a 30-day notice. So he is not eligible for an automatic severance. Now, the Constitution also puts provision in there for the deacon board to engage in emergency situations. They can spend without permission from the church up to 1% of the budget. At that point, the budget was $680,000 roughly. So that 1% means that the deacon board could, at their own choosing, give Mr. Little, Marcus, $6,800. And just tell the church we did it, and they have the power to do so. And we gave them that power. They're the deacon board. However, that probably wasn't going to meet the need quite the way that they wanted to meet the need. So the third provision that is in there that does not bind us to a previous decision is the special business meeting. With the special business meeting, the deacon board would have said to the church, we're making an announcement. We're going to hold a special business meeting in 2 weeks. We announce it this Sunday, next Sunday, the Sunday after that, we're holding a business meeting. We are recommending to the church that we vote to give Mr. Little a severance package because he served with us for 8 years, and he has resigned, and he does not currently have a replacement, and we want to make sure we take care of him. However, that didn't happen between March 27th and April 17th. So now the deacon board finds themselves in a situation where they still need to take care of Marcus. Remember, Plan A, if I understand it correctly, was to keep him on until June or July. Plan B pays the same as June A, it's just a different look. So here's what happens. On April 25th, the finance chair on the deacon board sends an email to the three people on the finance committee, letting them know that the deacon board is asking the finance committee to recommend a severance package. And that is an email on April 25th. On April 26th, the finance committee meets, they have a discussion about it, and they recommend the severance back to the deacon board. That recommendation doesn't give them power to just spend money. That recommendation simply goes back to the deacon board to go back to the church constitution and say, what's our next step? So that's what they did on April 26th. This is a correction to what I just said. I consulted with my wife, and what happened is they got the email and they were supposed to discuss it at the meeting on April 26th. But as the discussion went along, what the circumstances were, they were too busy with other discussions to get to that discussion. So at the end of that meeting, they said they would discuss it at the next meeting. So the correction is the finance committee never approved a severance package. That didn't happen. It was put off for the discussion until the next meeting. On May 5th, that's a Thursday night, Glenn Kerr calls my wife's cell phone, and she answers. We have family over, but she answers the phone, and she finds out it's Glenn, and he says he'd like to come over and talk to us. And she comes to me. I'm like, yeah, we can do it tomorrow night. That's fine. We're an open book, right? Dan and Bridget Byram, you've probably met us. So we're like, yeah, sure, come on over. We'll talk to you. So before my wife hangs up the phone, however, she says to him specifically and directly, what's this about? And he says, oh, just about stuff that's been going on. He arrives on May 6th. We welcome him in. We've known Glenn for 25 years. We welcome him in. We sit on the couch, have a nice chat. And so finally we kind of work ourselves around, well, Glenn, what's on your mind? And so then he produces the official notice that we are being put under church discipline. This is a formal procedure. We are being put under church discipline. And at the top of the letter, it explains in the first paragraph that we have been divisive in regards to Marcus and Kelsey Little's relationship to the church. And at the bottom of the letter, it says, for the good of all involved, we're suspending you from your ministries until this can be resolved. Now, we have a church conflict resolution policy. It's in writing. And if you start and read the policy, which I think it is a decent policy, especially for educational purposes and actual for functionality, one of the things it says is if the offense is not too great to overlook. If the offense is not too great to overlook, then forgive the person, overlook it, and move on. But if it is too great to overlook, whatever that offense is, you decide, then you should engage in Matthew 18:15-17. So when Glenn is sitting there, I want you to understand something. We have not talked to a deacon since we said on March 27th that he should no longer be teaching in the pulpit. We have not talked to a deacon about any of this for 40 days. Zero conversation. Understand, this is zero conversation. This is out of the blue from the deacon board. So I tell Glenn, hey, Glenn, you're out of order. This isn't how we do things. This isn't Matthew 18:15-17. You don't just get to read the conflict resolution, find the words that fit your bill of goods, and claim that you have the power to immediately engage in a official church discipline, because as soon as you became aware of it. This is Matthew 18:15-17. If your brother offends you, go to him one-on-one so you can win back your brother. If you can't, go to him 2 or 3, and if you can't, take it to the church. The deacon board decided that they were going to marry themselves together, 7 people equally offended in the marriage of deacon. So instead of being 7 offended people, they're going to be 1 offended body. That 1 offended body allows them to bypass Scripture and go straight to the policy to put us under church discipline. Next step was to meet with 3 deacons on Tuesday, May 10. So we met with the 3 deacons. We had another conversation about the conflict resolution policy and talking about Matthew 18:15-17. And we were assured in that meeting that this phrase covers the gamut. The deacon board can do whatever they want to do. They don't have to follow the Bible. One of the offenses against us was that we had used Facebook to post Bible verses about false teaching. And one of the conversations we had on that recorded thing was that I think my words were something along the lines of, what I'm saying is other people have done similar things during similar times and not be held accountable for their Facebook posts. And then we're supposed to meet with the deacon board on May 24 on a Tuesday. We invite 3 witnesses. 1 witness was a woman, 2 were men, and then we have the 7 deacons and Bridget and I. And we had a conversation. Now, keep in mind that we were found guilty in absentia. There was a court of deacons that decided that we had been divisive in the church and that there would be no we are convicted. So this was an appeals process. Try to convince the people who said you were guilty that you're not guilty. It's idiotic. It's illogical. It's idiotic. It's not fair. It is the hallmark of abuse of power. We're just going to hold you accountable because you've made us angry. But I want to ask the question: what makes you angry? What's the real play? Am I really under church discipline with threat of losing my membership for 2 Bible verses and a post on the live feed that nobody saw? Is that really what's happening? I'm going to go back and I'm going to say this. On April 25th, they put out this word called severance. They want to give Marcus a severance package, a gift of severance. Who gets a gift of severance? People who are fired, people who are laid off, whatever it is. Job elimination. Marcus resigned. This was a self-sever, and the deacon board is pretending that it's a firing, and they're justifying the fact that the people were not supportive during times of questioning, and so they're going to treat this as a firing. The next day they have the meeting. They approve this back to the deacon board. The severance has been approved by the finance committee. On that day, we had 3 members on the finance committee. The CPA, the person who attended our church for a very long time, he resigned from the church and the finance committee. I am speculating. I have not talked with him. But I believe he resigned from the finance committee because this was a crooked deal. This isn't how you do it. They were hiding the play. So he resigned. Go forward. The severance package begins. And before there's another finance committee meeting, my wife is suddenly removed from her ministry on the finance committee. The finance committee is down to 1 person. Is there a finance committee anymore if it's only 1 person? On April 19th, Marcus is a victim of our church. On April 26th, the deacon board says he needs a severance because he's a victim of our church. On that same day, there's a resignation from the finance committee. Then the deacon board shows up at our house and they make sure that they remove my wife from the finance committee because Mr. Little is our victim as well. What's going on when Glenn Kerr calls me on the phone? Does he not know they're paying a severance package? Does he not know he has that letter in his hand? So he shows up at my house and they look us in the face and say, you've been divisive in regards to Marcus and Kelsey Little's relationship with the church. You have to ask yourself, is that really why we're having a conversation? No, that's not really why. You're here to engage in deception, manipulation, and control, to intimidate and retaliate against my wife as a witness to the crime currently in progress. This is not an employment decision. We did not set up our church that way. Our Constitution allows the church members at a vote to hire a senior pastor and at a vote to fire a senior pastor. It's built that way on purpose. We did not fire him, he resigned. Flat out, he was not entitled in any way, shape, or form to have a severance. So in June 12th, there's a business meeting. Remember, we use the word severance many times here in this recent conversation. On June 12th, there's a business meeting. The chairman of the finance committee is running the finance aspect of this meeting. We're voting on the budget. And he says specifically to the church with no other information, don't know anything I've said to you, no other information, they say specifically, and I texted it that day to a friend of mine. He used the word, he says, and 1 month of the budget is going to Marcus as part of his compensation. Deception is creating a false impression using the omission of facts or the commission of a false statement. What is the false impression? This is earned income. It's compensation. Marcus earned it. It's his. We have to pay it to him. That's the word compensation in an employment setting. In private, they use the word severance. Why would they use the word severance? Because it's not compensation. It's a gift. The gift is coming out of the church's pocket, provided by the deacon board to put into Marcus's pocket without permission. How much clearer can it be? The very next day, I get a call from another deacon, and he comes over to deliver us their verdict based on our May 24 meeting. And the basics of the meeting is this. Well, we think that you've made a mountain out of a molehill, Dan. We think that you've exacerbated the problem. There's something going on here. Now, this is comical when you think. I did not have a gossip session. I didn't get together and chat with the girls, right? I didn't get them all in the room and go, you know that Dan and Bridget, they're bad people, right? I didn't do any of that. You came to my house 40 days after he made a resignation. I haven't said boo to you about your bad decisions. And now you're telling me that we have overreacted, calling you abusive? Here's what we think's behind all this. I think you have some emotional problems. You probably need some counseling. So we play their game, and we get a counselor. And I counsel with the counselor for 8 months. Now, I want to tell you, 6 months, sorry. I want to tell you this specifically, okay? This is not marriage counseling. This is counseling specifically to do with our divisiveness in regards to Marcus and Kelsey Little's relationship with the church. We are a unit. You came to our house, put us both under church discipline. We're a unit. So I represent my home. My wife does not answer to you, gentlemen. I talk with Josh. That's all we needed to do. And we found out some things from Josh. Josh agreed with us. Marcus is a false teacher. In January, Dave Banfield agreed with us that Marcus was a false teacher. In March 17th, I told them that Marcus was a false teacher. And here we are, after all this time, still having a conversation over Marcus being a false teacher. So in January, I meet with the board. Dave Kennedy calls me a con man, a liar, if you see my Facebook post. In February 10, we get a letter from the deacon board saying, well, we'd like to bring this matter to a close. Clearly, you still have problems. We're recommending that you resign your membership, which we did not resign. And then they gave us a deadline to write them a letter. You know, I did write a letter. I tried, but I was like, why am I playing this game? March 22nd, they wrote a letter. I think I got it on the 23rd or 24th of 2023, and they have voted us out as members of the church. So let's play to the validity of the church discipline. This is a valid church discipline based on the fact that we have been divisive in regards to Marcus and Kelsey's relationship with the church. This is part of the letter. It says, this letter is written, notice that we are initiating formal discipline consistent with section B.3.b. You are hereby notified to appear before the deacons at 6:30 p.m. on May 10, 2022 at the church. At that time, the deacons will specifically explain their concerns and outline the procedures that will be used as required by section B.3.c. A formal meeting, as directed by section B.3.d, will follow later and is your opportunity to respond to the concerns raised. We would like to schedule the formal meeting May 24 at 7 p.m. Please take time to read it carefully and attach the Constitution of Berean Baptist Church, especially Appendix 1, Church Policy on Conflict Resolution, Church Discipline, which will guide the process. The actual paper, probably with Glenn Kerr's fingerprints on it. Okay? That's May 6th. I apologize for my sarcasm, but it's just so rich. U.S. Postal System letter. Formal letter. This is signed by Mr. Kennedy. It is dated March 22nd, 2023. Your lack of response to our letter on February 10th indicates to us that you have chosen to separate yourself from Berean. Given this current situation, the board would like to bring the matter of your discipline and membership to a close. The board voted at our last meeting to officially end your membership at Berean Baptist Church. It's official. It's on letterhead. It's signed. And it came through the mail. We have one step to finish our church discipline. This is the Conflict Resolution Policy B3E5. B3E5. Here's what it says. Dismissal. The offender is no longer considered a member of the church. See Matthew 18:17b and see 1 Corinthians 5:11. If this is the censure action taken by the board, they will communicate it first to the offender and then to the church at a special business meeting duly called. Let you know that I sought counsel from Converge Mid-America. I talked to Danny Parmalee and I talked to Andrew Ford. I talked to Danny Parmalee. I started an email in January 8 of 2024, and I talked to him in February of 2024, and I sent another email because they never responded back after that conversation. Then I had another conversation with Andrew Ford in April of 2024. And the tenor of the conversation was basically they were disinterested in this conversation. So here's what he said. If the church discipline was valid starting May 6th, and we followed the process and we failed, and we are the problem, and the deacon board has voted us out following the conflict resolution policy, I need to know when you will be holding the meeting duly called to officially inform the church of our dismissal. I want to break it down so it's very simple. Everything before May 1st is what made everything after May 1st a criminal conspiracy to defraud the church. Everything before April was the setup. They could have backed out of the plan at any time, but when they decided they were going to do it on May 1st, everything after that is just done to forward the crime. It uses the word provision. Why? Because they have the power to give Josh provision because it was under their 1%. There's no provision mentioned when Marcus resigns, which makes sense. There's no provision mentioned in the April 19th letter. There's no provision mentioned in the April 28th letter. There's no provision mentioned in May at all. There's no provision mentioned in June until we get to the business meeting. And then that provision is called compensation. It's called severance in private. It's called compensation in public. I documented this that day. You can claim you don't remember it or that's not what was said. Doesn't really matter because there was no other documents produced for this provision. Marcus is the victim. He's the victim on April 19th. He's the victim on June 12th. He's the victim in the letter they wrote to us. And Marcus is getting money from the church without church permission. So the deacon board took actions to cover up the fraud, to steal the money from the church under the idea that Marcus was the victim. What did they do? Everybody else became victimized by their protection of Marcus. Marcus became the focus and everybody else had to be punished. We were punished because my wife was a part of the finance committee. We were punished because we were vocal and outspoken. We were punished because we knew he was disqualified. We were punished because we wrote a letter, 2 letters to the deacon board, which I can provide for you. We were punished. So everything they did to us, starting the minute Glenn Kerr lied to get in our house on May 5th, is nothing but criminal retaliation and intimidation to forward their crime. That's all it is. The church discipline is nothing but a ruse to cover up a crime. I think I've presented a fairly cohesive argument for why we're in a bad spot. But this is the story. The documents are the documents, the facts are the facts. And to our defense, we did nothing wrong. But I did not, my wife did not, engage in a series of deceptions, in a conspiracy to defraud the church, to steal their money behind their back and never tell them the truth. I did not try to intimidate the deacon board with threat. They did that to us. I did not do anything that required me to jump through their hoops because they did not engage in a valid conflict resolution. That's not what this was about. This was strictly a 3-step process. If Mr. Little was gone, we were going to be gone. The first step was revenge. Somehow, there's a perception that we wield power we don't wield. It is not our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. But the reason the revenge requires the removal was because they really needed to cover up the remuneration. After 35 minutes of chatting, the books tell the story. If Marcus was paid 3 months severance starting May 1st, going through July 31st, that was financial fraud, making us victims of that financial fraud. So this is an appeal. Would we like to handle this in public or in private? It's too late for secrets.